Welcome to At Home with Myself. I'm Kylie Zeal.
And I'm Magali de Castro.
This show is all about creating a better, stronger, and more enjoyable relationship with yourself.
Because your relationship with yourself is the longest relationship you will ever have. All right, so what are we talking about today, Kylie? What's the next element?
Yes, one of my favorite elements in the book, though I'll probably end up saying that about every element. It's the self-worth chapter. I guess why I say it's my favorite is it's like one of my go-to places in coaching is talking about self-worth, which relates to confidence. It's one of the niche areas for me. I work with a lot of people around this area of confidence, which inevitably comes down to also how much self-worth do I have. That's what sits underneath confidence. So I'm really excited to be covering element 3 today, self-worth.
Very exciting indeed. So when I kind of went back through the episode, one of the first sentences, or the episode, I should say, the elements, sort of rereading that chapter, one of the first things that came up for me is pretty much the first sentence of your self-worth is your decision about your right to exist and feel valuable. And the standout word there for me is decision, this sense that it's not necessarily something, even though worth is inherent and automatic, it doesn't necessarily translate that way to our actual experience of self-worth. It does become very much a decision for a lot of us that have started with a lower self-worth and have learned to gain or regain that along the way with some input.
You're spot on. That word decision is the operative word in that sentence. And that's something that I learned. I speak a lot about my own journey to creating what I feel is a really good sense of self-worth. What I learned throughout my journey towards creating better self-worth is that it is a decision. That's where I ultimately got to, is that all of these things that I did to create self-worth, in the end, it was just down to me and choosing to have worth and then acting accordingly. And yeah, there was a lot of things that I did along the way and they helped me get to that place. But I realized it didn't need to be that way. It shouldn't have involved so much exercises and brainwashing. I talk a lot about all the brainwashing that I did to finally create a greater level of self-worth, when in the end it's ultimately striving to give myself permission to make the decision. And it's what I encounter in a lot of other people as well. I say in the book that people will sometimes argue with me. And I say, no, you can't just decide to have self-worth. I get my self-worth because I tried something new and then I failed and then I got back up. And then I failed and I got back up and I did all these things, lots of training and courses. And I say, yeah, I mean, I understand that that's part of the journey in lots of cases. That was what a lot of my journey looked like. But what you're doing throughout all of those exercises and those failings and getting back up is you're fighting for the right to make the decision. But you don't need to fight and strive for something that you already own and can never be taken away from you simply because you exist. That's why you have it.
I think that's a great point, because it's almost like the interesting trap of self-worth or low self-worth is that, one, it can be very deceptive. It can sort of live under the surface, drive and inform everything that you do, and you're not even aware that the reason you're doing what you're doing is because you have that low self-worth. But also there's the trap of, in that scenario that you're speaking of, I earned my self-worth, this concept that self-worth has to be earned, when then I would pose the question of, would you say that a newborn baby, are they worthy? Is a it's a child worthy? Is an adolescent worthy? And we often kind of go, well, yeah, they haven't done anything wrong. They're fully worthy. So it's like, well, where along the line do you lose that self? Like, what happens? What happens along the way where all of a sudden you are no longer that fully deserving, fully worthy human being. So I think that's the trap. It's like the baby didn't have to do anything to earn it. It's just for being, you know, they are worthy. They have that full worth and full value, you know, for being and existing. So I think that's an interesting trap where we can along the way make decisions or believe certain beliefs that mean that, oh no, for me to feel like I have value or that I have worth, I need to do certain things, have certain things, express certain things, or have attained different achievements, or have a particular body or certain features, or which is like, well, something's not really adding up there. Like, to me, that's an interesting trap.
Yeah, really well said. And I was really thinking when you said, you know, the baby is born worthy and a child is, and then what happens when we get to our like teenage years? I mean, it begins even sooner than that. I mean, it's even as children we begin to adopt or absorb these messages about all of the things that we need to have or do in order to be worthy. And as you were talking about that, I'm thinking, well, what is it that happens? What causes the change? And straight away, I start thinking about all the external stuff, and I start thinking about the media. We are constantly bombarded with advertising messages about all the things that we need to buy, like beauty products, right? If in this moment, every person, and especially women, if we just decided in this moment that we have worth, the beauty industry would go out of business.
Collapse. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but we have fear. Because we have an innate desire to be loved and accepted, and so the other side of that coin is the fear of not being loved and accepted, and the media and advertising preys on that fear, and they literally tell us messages such as, you need to buy this particular product and then you can be accepted and loved, and we buy into it because it's connected to that innate fear that we have.
Yeah. This week I had an interesting sort of moment of insight, or a bit of a moment of reflection and or self-revelation, which was around that sort of sense of self-worth, and how it can happen very early on as a child. Something happens, and it doesn't have to be something traumatic, but the way that the child interprets it means that it becomes that mark that then drives all sorts of other behaviors. So the tangible example was, someone asked, you know, if I felt like I had a very distant relationship with my father, and there wasn't any bad blood. It was just a fairly quiet person. We didn't really spend a lot of time together because my parents were separated, but we had a very positive or seemingly like amicable relationship. He wasn't like the affectionate type. So, but that was fine. Like it was just, that's just who he was. Yeah. But then there was someone asked, you know, if I could see how I had felt in some way controlled by him as in general in my life. And I thought my first reaction was, no, he actually didn't really seem to have a very strong, he was almost like a non influence in a weird way in my life, because he wasn't really there so much. But then the more I explored it, I was like, well, actually, I have always been very starved for attention, and one of my biggest drivers was to be seen as like the clever girl by my mom, and I always wanted to impress my mom, and my mom was very good at giving me that reinforcement of, oh, you know, well done, you've done this, and that's fantastic, and that's, whereas from my dad, my whole life I never got that. But that's just because that's who he is. Doesn't mean that he didn't love me, doesn't mean that he wasn't proud of me. He's just not the type to be affectionate or very expressive or very, you know. But I think thinking back is like, as an adult, I understand that, you know, and I accept it, and there's no jadedness in me. But I can think back and go, actually, as a child, I can see how, like, you know, my child version, the child version of me would have been very puzzled and confused as to why am I not getting the response from this parent that I'm so desperately craving that I'm getting from this other parent, you know, and how then I could have made that mean that there's something wrong with me, or there's something not quite right with me, because the thing that I had associated with you're doing a good job is this particular way of a parent or someone expressing their appreciation for what I'm doing, or their approval of what I'm doing. So I said, that isn't that interesting how definitely I could see how a part of me, again from childhood, could have taken that hit to their self-worth, going, there's something not quite right with me, because not everyone is responding the way they should, or I believed that they should. And again, it's not something that I became aware of until like literally last week. That could be unconsciously driving, you know, my behavior in there. And it's like, oh, and it's just a kid's interpretation of an event that happened, you know, 30 years ago.
Yeah, I resonate with everything that you're saying. I can think of an endless list of so many seemingly even small sometimes incidences that constantly just reinforced and reinforced the belief that I'm not innately worthy. I don't have worth just because I exist. There was always this need to do something or have something before I can actually be worthy. So I really appreciate what you're saying, and how we just adopt. Where like, children are sponges, aren't they? We absorb everything, and I think this is really part of the human journey, because you could have the most perfect parent in the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to do and say exactly the right things that you need to hear and experience in order to be worthy. And I share this sometimes with clients who are parents and who have concerns about how they might have damaged their children or are not setting them up for having self-worth. And what I said once, and I realized it's so true after the words came out of my mouth, is I said to a client, you would only be the perfect parent if the child that you gave birth to was an exact replica of you, because only then could you really know what that child actually needs in every moment in order to feel loved and complete. But the reality is, the child that comes from the parent is their own personality. You know, it's not necessarily different to when I moved to another country, and the organization that I was working for at the time placed me in a shared apartment with two other people who fortunately I got along pretty well with. One of them I got along better with than the other, but I appreciate them for different reasons. But having a child is probably not much more different to that. Suddenly you've got a new housemate, and they are their own personality. And so I think this contributes to how it's a very similar experience for a lot of us, that we didn't always get everything that we needed to develop self-worth. And if you did, maybe that was a bit of luck too, because sometimes the child will be similar to a replica of their parents, and then that parent is going to have an easier time perhaps in knowing what that child needs. So there's a bit of luck involved in whether your parent is going to know what you need. But we also, I think you agree here, Magali, that we ascribe to the belief that whichever parents you did get, that was the perfect parents for you, because there are lessons that we need to get in this lifetime. And sometimes the lessons do mean that our self-worth is impacted, but those were valuable lessons for other reasons.
Yeah. You even mentioned it in the book. You'd say, this is sort of quoted directly from the book, parents unconsciously teach self-doubt to their children. Of course, children don't learn so much from what they're told as they do from what is modeled to them. So I myself am not a parent. I mean, I only have a furry child that is a beautiful puppy, but I don't actually have human children. But I do genuinely believe that, you know, one of the best things that you could possibly do as a parent is to essentially be the role model, do the things that you believe are gonna, you know, make you happiest and make people happy and sort of have that harmony and, you know, beauty for life or whatever, as opposed to just kind of go, well, I'm a lost case, but you need to do this and you need to, because there's that, it's disjointed then, and it comes across as hypocritical then, even if it's subconsciously hypocritical. So a lot of the times I think a lot of the behavior that we learn from our parents, a lot of it is things that we've seen them do, either consciously or unconsciously. We've picked up from them in one way or another. Some of those things are good, some of those things are not so good in terms of how we interact with the world, but we have taken them on as our tools or our coping mechanisms. And so this is why then going back to that self-knowledge, that first element, is so important, and why it's an ongoing journey, because so much of your journey then becomes picking up on things that you've learned along the way from other people. And it's, again, it's not, I feel like a lot of the learning that we do, particularly when it's behaviors or beliefs, is not conscious. It's like something resonates at that point in time, we take it on and we kind of put it on ourselves, like where it's a piece of clothing, and then we wear it for the rest of our lives without even looking back at ourselves in the mirror going, oh my goodness, I've been wearing this, you know, this torn jumper for 30 years without realizing, because I hadn't actually taken a look at myself, and this has kind of been holding me back, or it's been making me cold, making me feel cold my whole life. But yeah, so I think self-knowledge, ongoing self-knowledge and self-exploration, and being really open and courageous, or also being comfortable with being vulnerable, because as we've said before, it's not always a comfortable experience. It can be confronting, but there is so much relief and at the other side of that, like on the when you actually experience that growth and have that aha moment and that realization of, oh my goodness, no wonder I've been cold my whole life. I've been wearing this torn jumper my whole life, which I just picked up along the way. I didn't even realize that I had put this on, like it was sort of unconscious.
Yeah, you remind me of the words which I think are in this book somewhere, and it's the quote that says, don't believe everything that you think. The first time I ever read that, I thought it was ridiculous. Like, it's what I think, so it's what I believe. And the point is to question what you believe, and don't believe everything that you think. And the older I get, the more I realize how true that saying is, because I've learned that there were things that I believed wholeheartedly 10 years ago. And once upon a time, I actually believed I wasn't worthy. And the way that I behaved was evidence of that. I regularly put up with poor treatment from other people because I didn't believe I was worthy of more. And now if I encountered anyone like that, I just wouldn't even give them the time of day. I wouldn't even feel resentful or angry towards them. I just, it wouldn't even make a dent. I would just notice, oh, okay, that person is saying something horrible. I think they're trying to make me feel bad. But it's interesting when you notice that perhaps someone is trying to make you feel bad, but they actually don't. Whereas 10, 20 years ago, it was almost the opposite experience, where I didn't necessarily even recognize that was what they were trying to do, but I got the impact that I just felt bad. And it's not necessarily like I was resentful for them. I just bought into it. They're doing something that's making me feel like I'm not worthy, and I'm just accepting because I believe it.
Yeah, I would even contest that sometimes they're not even trying to do that to make us feel bad. Sometimes they might be doing it to make themselves feel good. So it's almost like the aim of it, or the focus, the intention behind it, almost had nothing to do with you, even though it was directed at you, had actually nothing to do with you. For whatever reason, they were feeling unworthy, or their own sense of value was down, and a way for them to feel or try to make themselves feel better might be to say or do whatever it is that they're doing to kind of, we know in the long term it doesn't work. Like that's never an approach that actually is effective or sustainable. But sometimes it actually doesn't even, and sometimes it's actually a misinterpretation of some of the way that someone said something, or they didn't say something, and we took it to mean that they were insulting us, when really, actually, no, you know, when you confront them about that, they might go, what? No, I have no idea. I had no idea that that was coming across that way. So my apologies for that. That was not at all my intention. So it's like, it's a potential minefield in terms of whenever we're trying to interpret what other people mean and what they're trying to do. It's like you can't ever fully 100% know with certainty what someone else is trying to do or trying to achieve or is believing in that moment. But you definitely have a lot more control, if not full control, over what you're believing in that moment and what you're making it mean, and whether you're taking it on as, oh, this is a criticism and therefore it means that I am less than or whatever, or not. Or even if it was a criticism, go, this is a criticism, you know, if I'm open to it, you might be right. I can see parts of in my life where that is true. Okay. Or, you know, it's a criticism. Does that resonate with me? Actually, no, it doesn't resonate with me. But thank you for that, because it gave me the opportunity to look at myself and go, does this make sense? Does this not make sense? No. Okay, great.
Yeah, 100%. And you got me thinking that, you know, it is this big kind of grey, uncertain thing sometimes when we're talking about self-worth. I think I take it for granted now what it is and what it looks like, because it's become more second nature to me. But I encounter so many people all the time for whom it's still a really foreign thing to have self-worth. I mean, maybe they get it logically. I mean, they know what the words self-worth mean, but to actually embody it, to experience it, just to know beyond any doubt that you are worthy. That doesn't mean I don't get nervous or anxious when I need to stand up and give a presentation, for example, but it's not that my worth is never impacted by whether I perform badly or not. It's just a separate thing now. But because of all this kind of vagueness and question, I think that a lot of people have around self-worth, I thought we could look at what does self-worth actually look like, or high self-worth, what does it look like, and we can go through these. And the first one that I had on the list here was, as a sign of self-worth, is you take care of yourself. Right? Basically, if you think you are worthy, then naturally you look after yourself better as someone who deserves to be looked after better, in the same way that you would look after a new car because it's worth a lot of money, right? You just look after yourself in the same way. That was the first one. The second one on the list is you have quality relationships. This is definitely a sign of self-worth, and therefore it's also a sign of low self-worth. If you know that you are interacting with or in a relationship with someone who just treats you like crap, for lack of a better word, this is a sign of low self-worth. If you had high self-worth, you wouldn't put up with poor treatment. Now, sometimes we put up with poor treatment because we don't have the tools or the skills or the language to know how to engage better. And sometimes we can perpetuate the dynamic that is happening between you and the other person. And so therefore, self-worth can sometimes look like going and getting the skills so that I know how to speak up for myself and I know how to be assertive when I'm faced with poor treatment. Ultimately, this is a sign of self-worth, is that you have quality relationships. Another sign is that you are incomparable. I learnt the term interiority complex from a TED talk by, yeah, me too. She compares interiority complex to superiority complex, which is when you think that you're the most important person around, which is that's also a false form of self-worth. And she compares it to inferiority complex, where you have an over modest sense of self-worth. So interiority complex is where you go to the interior. You're separating all of the things that are outside of you, all of the messages about what you need to have and do in order to have worth, and you just go inward. You only need to be better than who you were yesterday. That's it. And that's your gauge. It doesn't matter what's going on with anybody else, as long as you know within yourself that you are doing your best and you're making improvements, no matter how small. That's where your attention is going when you have an interiority complex. The next sign is that approval is unnecessary. as I say that, I see that that's similar to having inferiority complex, because we're not needing the validation from the external. This is getting more specifically around the concept of approval. Now, it's not that people with high self-worth don't want or like approval. I love compliments and praise. Yeah. And that's a healthy part of having self-worth, actually, is being able to receive a compliment and simply say thank you, as opposed to people who say, oh, it was nothing, or no, that's not true. Like, they can't actually be with a compliment when they don't have self-worth. And similarly, the approval is a need rather than a want. I want approval. The difference is I don't need it. I don't fall apart when I don't get it. And how often do we see that in people, that they literally start falling apart? They can't focus on anything else when someone has disapproved of them or criticized them. It's not like I'm totally immune to it. Like, I notice a shift within myself. I notice a yucky feeling in my gut if I receive some disapproval. It's just that I catch it fast because I know what to watch out for now. And I go, oh, hang on. What's going on right now is not even about them. It's not even about what they said. It's about my lack of self-worth that's allowing me to be impacted by what they said. And then I just turn my attention to something more useful, because there's just no point in giving energy to that. Another sign of self-worth is that
before we move on to that one, I was going to say, with that, that sense of approval, one of the things that has, with that sense of approval, one of those things that has evolved over time for me is, because that was a big one for me, like needing and feeding on approval from other people, of having done a good job, of having created something that is valuable or worthwhile. And as the more sort of work and self-work and growth that has happened, particularly learning, getting to that point where you go, actually, all I really need is my own internal approval. That is, you know, if I'm happy with what I've done, I no longer need or even want other people's approval unless I get it. In which case, I do get it. When I do get approval because I've done something that, you know, someone else also resonates with, it becomes a cherry on top. Again, it doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it and I don't love it, but it's not. It's almost like it's a surprise. It's like this is like a wonderful delight, surprise and delight that happens as a consequence of just creating something that you believed was worthwhile when you were creating it. So it's almost like, for me, the focus has shifted from I'm creating something because I think people will love it, to I'm creating something because I feel the need to create this, because I feel like I am resonating with this. I feel like I'm vibrating at a higher frequency, or whatever that means. When I'm doing this, I'm enjoying and loving this process. Like, I am existing, I am living while I'm doing this. And then once it's created, I myself kind of like can delight in it and go, I love this. I love what's come of it. And then, you know, if I feel like sharing it, I'll share it. And if other people go, that's amazing, you go, great. I'm glad you like it too. If no one responds to it, I've already had the joy of it, the fruit of it has already been experienced, which is very different to where I used to approach things from, where the whole time I was creating something, I was thinking of, you know, what kind of approval am I going to get from this? Are people going to like this? Is this going to come across as stupid or as naive or as too simple or too? And then obviously it means that the whole process itself is more stressful. So it's not as light, free, and as creative as it could be, because it's almost like it's tainted. And then there's so much pressure and there's so much weight on how it's going to be received, that it's like you don't really get to enjoy the process as much. And then you definitely don't get to enjoy it when the approval comes. It's almost like it's a relief as opposed to a wow, oh great, you know, it's amazing that you love it too. Great, we have that in common, you know. Yeah, so I thought I'd share that from the approval, because approval has been a very big concept in my life as something to tackle and address.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I imagine a lot of people will be able to resonate with that, because I certainly did resonate with the experience of needing approval on times that I've done things in the past for approval, and still sometimes catch myself with that. but more often these days thinking about what do I simply enjoy. And Magali, you'll probably laugh as well, like I am, when I think about one of the main reasons we're even doing this podcast is because we enjoy chatting with each other.
Yes.
This conversation that we're having, people don't know this about us, but this is what so many of our conversations look and sound like anyway. And so we figured, well, why don't we just hit the record button while we have a conversation that we would normally be having anyway.
Correct.
And it just makes the whole situation or the whole activity lighter and easier, and because we don't have anything riding on the outcome. If people choose not to listen to this, our attitude's going to be, okay, well, we would have had that conversation anyway. It's not like we wasted any time by having the conversation. This is what we like to talk about. So yeah, I love that, and I love that we're having these conversations because they're actually turning out to be even more enjoyable than I had originally anticipated. So I'm excited about all the places.
I always feel like I grow so much whenever we have these conversations, because again, so much of it is like when you're having the conversation, of course, it's coming up from within you. So obviously it's stuff that you had within you, but it's only just getting, a lot of times it's only crystallizing at the point that you're talking about them. So it's like, even though those concepts or ideas or realizations were within you, they weren't a real thing, or they weren't a tangible thing until you quite literally brought them to life by speaking them out, by articulating them. So that's why I feel like, with these conversations, the joy and the fruit and the main purpose of them is just to have the conversation. So the sharing them is the cherry on top. Any enjoyment or benefit that anyone else gets to have out of them, it almost feels like that's not even our business anymore. Remember how we were talking about, like, what's my business, what's someone else's business, what's like reality's business or God's business? It's like, that's outside of my control. But I was here, I had the fun, I created, this conversation, or had it from a genuine point of sharing, exploring. And then if someone gets something out of it, fantastic. But it's almost like my work here is done, if that makes sense. Of just, my work here was to have fun with this conversation with you.
You're reminding me of something I heard from Elizabeth Gilbert. I'm pretty sure it was in her book, Big Magic. And she talked about how I think she was at a book signing, and someone had come to see her and had said, oh, I loved your book. I loved the part where you said you did something with her husband, like had stood up to her husband, and you stood up to him because he had had an affair or something like that. And Elizabeth Gilbert was thinking, well, that never actually happened, and I didn't write that in the book. But she thought, well, who am I to say what this person should take away from the book? It obviously helped them in some way, and that's what they needed to take away from the book. I thought that was brilliant too. And it gave me a lot of freedom, because I think I was listening to some of Liz Gilbert's things even at the time of writing this book, 7 Freedom Elements, and it gave me a lot of freedom in writing and putting my book out there, because I no longer needed to be attached on what I would make people think or say or do, because I have no control over that whatsoever. And so a lot of freedom in that.
Definitely.
Okay, the next sign of high self-worth here is that if you have high self-worth, you can speak your truth and you can stay open to feedback from others. Now, I remember one time I was coaching a client, and what she had come to the coaching session for is that she wanted to be effective in giving feedback to her staff. She was not good at giving feedback. She was too nice, basically, and she wouldn't really tell them the things that they probably needed to hear in order to improve and grow and behave in the way that they needed to behave to be part of the team, etc. And it wasn't long before I turned the conversation around and I said to her, well, how are you at getting feedback? If you imagine right now that you're sitting across a table from your manager and you're receiving feedback on your performance at work, and let's imagine that he or she starts giving you negative, critical feedback. How do you feel and how do you respond when that happens? And she said, oh, I just want to get under the table. I want to cower under the table and hide away. And I said, okay, that's what we need to work on. If we work on your ability to sit with the discomfort of negative feedback, you will also be fine on sitting with the discomfort of giving. No, I don't even want to say negative. It was just critiquing someone. It's supposed to be helpful feedback, but even that she struggled with, because there's a direct correlation between those two things. The day that you can receive negative feedback and be okay is the same day that you will be able to speak your truth. There's a quote in the book from Brene Brown that I think is so perfect, and I'd love to share it right now. And she said, "Show me a woman who can actually sit with a man in real vulnerability and fear, and I'll show you a woman who's done incredible work. You show me a man who can sit with a woman who's just had it, she can't do it all anymore, and he really listens, and I'll show you a guy who's done a lot of work." And that is what it takes, right? It's not easy to just go, okay, I'm going to be okay with feedback. I'm just going to be okay. No, it does take work. And it's one of the reasons that you and I are motivated not only to have these conversations with each other, Magali, but we felt some need and desire to put them out into the world in case there was even one person that needs to hear this message and the truths that we talk about in terms of having self-worth and what it takes to actually live in alignment with the belief of being worthy.
You know, I was brought up Catholic, and I was very, like, I really resonated with a lot of stuff that more from a Christian point, that, you know, sort of, I always felt like Jesus was onto something, or, you know, he was kind of, there was something that there was something beautiful about the message, the core message. And I always felt like, I feel like, you know, some of the religious teachings are losing or missing the point. And one of the things that for some reason I could never, one of the quotes that I could never really get, and there was something that just never kind of sat right with me, was this concept of the meek shall inherit the earth. Are you familiar with that line from the Bible, of the meek, shall inherit the earth?
Yes, I am.
So this was the issue that was bringing up for me. There was this sense of, you know, in order for you to it was this whole, in order for you to gain anything, you had to be nothing. Yeah. So it's like, you know, the people, it's almost like the sense of like, you have to suffer and you have to go through all this, you know, you have to kind of have nothing, but then you will take over, and it's going to be this complete flip of all of a sudden, you know, you're going to have all the power. And I was like, there's just something that doesn't make sense in interpreting it like that. Like, to me, it doesn't, like, something didn't sit right or didn't ring in line with what felt like true to me, and I can't even describe what that is. Today, as I was like revisiting the stuff and like revisiting this element and going through that whole, this particular portion that we're talking about now, this being comfortable with taking feedback on and hearing criticism and kind of hearing it, it made sense to me. So let me try and explain what I mean by that. I went, oh my goodness, yes, that has become a truth that I've realized, that the more comfortable, and actually you have a quote from Carl Jung that says, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Yeah, so the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And that's why a lot of the times we actually don't want to look in that metaphorical mirror, because we're scared of what we might see. But the thing that came up for me immediately as I read that was, yes, however, it might be terrifying, however, from experience, it is also the most illuminating and liberating thing that you can ever do. Look at that mirror and go, yeah, that's there is a darkness there, or that's something that, you know, I might have been trying to go, I'm not like that, but I am like that. And that's fine. That's, you know, that is what that is. So getting to that point of acceptance, getting to that point where you can sit with somebody and someone might be telling you criticisms and you are just humble. And by that, I mean, you're just open and you're just genuinely, and you talk about this, just you're listening without an agenda. You're listening without a wall or getting defensive. You're genuinely curious to learn how's someone else seeing you. And a lot of times you might go, when you listen with that wall down, you might go, actually, yeah, I can see how in my life I have done things like that, or I have had, I would have come across like that. And that's fine. It's like, it is what it is. And then at that moment, that's when it clicked for me. Oh my gosh, yes. When you're that meek, when you can get to that point where you're just comfortable with who you are, and you're just comfortable with that humility. And by humility, I don't mean, a lot of times, it was interesting when I kind of went to look for the definition of humility. So much of it was that, low self-value, less important than, when, like, that's not at all what humility is to me. With humility, sort of, to me, that you're coming in without an agenda. You're coming in, you're open, you're comfortable with being vulnerable. You're genuinely just there, and listening. Yeah, you're just taking that in and going, yeah, like, let me just sit with it and explore it. When you're comfortable, when you can get to that point of, quote unquote, meekness, which, again, looked up the definition in the dictionary, and meek was equated with quiet, gentle. Yeah, if you sit in a quiet, gentle attitude as you're hearing criticism, and not like getting all riled up, it's like, no, just taking it in. Don't make it mean anything. Just listen and go, does that, there is so much power in that. You are literally invulnerable. You are literally, when you're able to sit in that meekness and that openness, you have inherited your life. You have inherited the earth. You have inherited the whole world, the whole universe, because there's literally, you have everything. You have absolutely everything that you could possibly need. And that's my rant. And I think I was just very excited, because it finally, that was one of those sentences or ideas that, for the longest time, in a very religious upbringing, I was like, I resonate with a lot of things that I can't seem to make align with what feels right to me. And then today it was like, that feels right. Yes, meekness, from that quiet gentleness of being open to the world, listening. And there's no fear. There's absolutely no fear, because all that, the worst thing that can happen is a thought or a belief that you go, yeah, that might be true. Okay, yeah, interesting.
Really well said. I think this is one of the keys to happiness for any human being, is the ability to sit with discomfort. I know we talk about this or I write about it in this chapter, about being able to sit with this discomfort, and I write about Ita Rita, which I smile as I say this, because there's still a part of me that almost feels a bit embarrassed, like, oh my God, I've actually just told the world, published a book and told the world that I talked to this part of myself called Ita Rita. Because it seems a bit crazy, but the reason I'm okay with the crazy is because it works. It worked so brilliantly that I wanted to explore this whole concept of the shadow that Jung talks about, and I knew that there was days, sometimes for a while, probably every day, where I would criticize myself, and there was parts of myself that I was ashamed or embarrassed about, and I just decided, you know what, I give that part of myself the ugliest name that I could think of. And I'll go in, the reason why I picked that name is in the book, so I won't bother going into that now. But the point is, I came up with this name, Ita Rita, and what happened was, instead of making it this ugly part of myself that I was trying to reject and disconnect from, I gave that part of myself a name, and she started to become more human, and I would engage with her. And basically over time, I came to love her, which means I came to love the ugly parts of myself, the parts that I thought were shameful. And now it just seems ludicrous to me that I would think of any part of myself as shameful. But that was, once upon a time, my reality. The next item on the list of signs of healthy, high self-worth is perfect is unnecessary. One of my go-to mottos for getting anything done and not being a procrastinator is progress over perfection, always. Perfectionism is a sign of low self-worth. It is grounded in the need of approval from others. And the next one on our list of signs of healthy high self-worth is you can let things go. So often we hold on to things, these things that we think are the source of our self-worth. Relationships, for example. I used to be terrible at letting go of toxic relationships because I guess being in a toxic relationship was better than being alone. And somehow I thought that being alone was a sign of not being worthy if someone didn't want me. Now I love being alone. It's such a massive turnaround for me, like the ability to let things go. I've almost taken it to an extreme. You know, I literally put everything I own into storage and began traveling full time. And the feeling I have of no longer having a house or stuff or all of the things, I love it. I love the freedom. So totally. And I'm not recommending to other people that this is what you need to do to have self-worth. Do not misinterpret me. I'm just saying that this is what it turned out to be for me, was just letting go of just the stuff. And all that I'm left with really is myself, my laptop so I can do my writing, great conversations like this one, quality relationships. They're the things that I really value and want in my life.
Mm.
And the last item I have on the list of what a healthy high self-worth looks like is you feel full. And this is not full like you've just eaten a giant meal, although maybe it is for some people. It's just this sense of abundance. Like when I'm really feeling grounded in self-worth, I start laughing spontaneously. Like it's just like this unbridled joy because you feel full of good energy. I don't even quite know how to describe it. I just know that I'm connected to this energy in the highest part of myself, and it just makes me feel so much joy, and it overflows. And it's like you just want to give it to people. I think that's what we were probably tapping into, Magali, when we said, well, let's record some of our conversations. It's like, it's overflowing. Let's just put it out there, and someone might happen to tune in, but they would never have even the opportunity to tune in if we didn't feel this sense of just wanting to give out some of what we've got here. And I really appreciate that when I get that experience from other people as well, when people just give because they feel like I've got enough and I want to give. And it's completely opposite when you have this lack of self-worth. There's an emptiness that goes with low self-worth, and we buy things and just consume things as a way of trying to fill that emptiness. And as we know, it never gets filled that way. But the irony is that the feeling of fullness that comes with self-worth and self-love is nothing material. It's nothing physical. It's completely just, you know, in terms of coming full circle in this conversation, the place where we started was self-worth is a decision. And that feeling of fullness purely comes from not a credit card and purchasing something, but a decision that I am worthy, no matter what happens around me, no matter what I own, no matter what I do, no matter what mistakes I make, no matter anything. I am worthy of love and self-acceptance simply because I exist.
It's your right. It's your inheritance, essentially. It's like just for existing, that's it. Like you are worthy. Like you are valuable. Like there's nothing you have to do. There's nothing you have to be. There's nothing you have to earn and gain. It's all of those are concepts where, yeah. So I think like, yeah, you've nailed it. And the whole time that you've been talking about this, I've had the biggest smile on my face because the way that you were describing it, I remember very clearly. I had a very amazing conversation with this beautiful lady she would have been in her 50s, and she had so much resentment towards her mother because she felt like, you know, she didn't have a mother who was very affectionate towards her, very cold. She sort of felt like she didn't, you know, she wasn't loved by her. And throughout the conversation, she just had this breakthrough moment where she realized that all of that was the way that she had been interpreting it. And in fact, there was so much evidence to the fact that her mom did love her in whatever way she knew how. But actually, like, she was always there for her whenever she needed it. And so this woman had kind of shut herself down emotionally for over 40 years of her life. And in that moment, she just started crying, and she said, like, I just can't stop. I just feel like this is like a fountain of love, is the way that she described it, has opened up inside of me, and it's just pouring out, which was exactly what you were just saying, just pouring out, and I can't stop it, and I don't want to stop it. I just want to give it away to everyone for free. And she kept saying, for free, which I thought was so beautiful, and was just such an amazing moment. And I remember in that moment experiencing that and going, oh my God, like this feels like it just feels like a miracle. It feels like I'm witnessing a miracle taking place. And literally all it was this person who had kind of shut themselves down to love, to even from within, like their own love for so much of their life. And then there was just that one moment where just something was released, that true, what we call kind of quantum forgiveness, where she kind of realized it wasn't that, you know, my mom was not loving, but I'm gonna forgive her even though she did something wrong. It wasn't that at all. It was seeing that her mom didn't do anything wrong. Her mom was actually always trying to do the best she could and express her love in the only way she knew how, which wasn't necessarily with affections. It was with the way that she was kind of setting things up for her, or being there for her, be it financially or whatever. And yeah, and like just that one release of that belief that had controlled her whole life was just so life-changing in an instant, that I was like, oh my goodness, this is like this feels like this. It was one of the most like transformative experiences of my life, just witnessing that happening. But yeah, that was what's coming up for me. That's that sense, exactly what you were talking about. It's like a fountain that is just pouring over, and it's just uncontrollable, and you don't want to control it. You just want to let it, you know, just pour out.
Wow, I love that. Thank you so much. And I've loved covering this element with you in discussion. I'm just loving it. It gives me this sense of, wow, I wrote this book. Did I really create this?
Yeah.
And it was, you know, we were friends long before I even wrote this book. And I think there's a part of you in these pages as well, Magali, and now we get to revisit it all over again through these conversations. And yeah, I'm just really loving and appreciative of it. I will mention to anyone who's listening and who wants more, please know that whilst we covered the signs of healthy self-worth in the later part of that particular chapter, there's also at least four sections of four instructions on how to develop self-worth, or should I say suggestions, ideas on how to develop self-worth. So if you want more on that, it is in there. But for now, I guess we're going to wrap up, because we've been covering a lot and I've loved it, and I'm looking forward to our next element. I should probably say what that is. I know, I've suddenly drawn a blank. You'd think I would know my own book.
No,
the next element is energy. This is a really important chapter as well. I'm probably going to say that about every chapter, but I guess that's why the book is called 7 Freedom Elements, because I literally thought about everything in life and thought, well, what are the 7 key things that you need to develop in order to experience a life of freedom? And these were the 7 things. So yeah, I probably am going to say this is a really important chapter for each and every one of them. And element 4, which we'll be covering next, is energy. And in that conversation, as we do in the chapter, I will explain why energy is your most important resource, even more important than your time.
Intriguing, exciting, and looking forward to it.
Great. Thanks, Magali. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. Bye.
To get more information about the book 7 Freedom Elements and how to get a copy, go to Kylie's website, kyliezeal.com. That's KYLIEZEAL.com.